The closer we get to the start of the season, the more the spotlight intensifies on situations that can completely shift a team's trajectory. And right now, one of the most intriguing and concerning storylines revolves around Jose Barrios. What initially seemed like a routine part of spring preparation quickly turned into something much bigger, and it all unfolded in a way that nobody really saw coming. At first, everything pointed in the right direction. Barrios was feeling good, throwing without limitations, showing no visible signs of discomfort. From the outside, there was no reason to believe anything was wrong. In fact, the expectation was that he would continue building momentum and potentially represent his country at the World Baseball Classic, which made the entire situation even more surprising. Because it wasn't pain, it wasn't performance, and it wasn't any kind of in-game incident that raised concerns. It was a mandatory MRI, a standard procedure required for insurance clearance, something that usually just confirms that everything is fine. But in this case, it revealed inflammation in his right elbow, and that single detail immediately changed the tone around his status. From there, things escalated quickly. When a pitcher is sent to consult with a specialist known for dealing with serious arm injuries, it naturally raises eyebrows. And once the diagnosis came in, it added another layer of concern: a stress fracture in the elbow. That's not the kind of term you casually overlook, especially in baseball, and especially for someone whose role depends entirely on the health of that joint. What makes this even more complicated is the nature of the injury itself. A stress fracture isn't the result of one bad throw or a single moment of impact. It's built over time. Repetition, strain, constant extension of the elbow, the exact mechanics that define a pitcher's job. That's why this type of issue tends to linger and why it can quietly grow into something far more serious if not handled properly. And yet, Barrios didn't feel it. No pain, no warning signs, nothing that would have triggered concern without that scan. On one hand, that might sound encouraging, but on the other, it creates a dangerous illusion. Because when the body isn't sending clear signals, it becomes much easier to underestimate the severity of what's actually happening beneath the surface. Now, add in the fact that this involves the same elbow that has given him trouble before, and suddenly, this isn't just a minor setback. It becomes a pattern, or at the very least, a situation that demands extreme caution, especially when the current plan involved a short period of rest followed by a return to throwing, which raises a big question. Is that really enough time for something caused by long-term overuse? Inside the Toronto Blue Jays organization, this development forces a shift in how the rotation is viewed heading into the season. What once looked like a deep and flexible group now carries more uncertainty. Losing a key arm, even temporarily, can ripple through the entire pitching staff and affect how roles are defined early on. And this is where the debate really starts to heat up. In a season that stretches over months, is it worth pushing a player back quickly just to have him available at the beginning? Or is it smarter to take a step back now, allow full recovery, and avoid the risk of a much bigger issue later on? Because history has shown that injuries like this don't just disappear with minimal rest. At the same time, there's the human side of it. Barrios is a competitor. After dealing with ups and downs, after missing key moments, the desire to get back on the mound and prove himself is naturally strong. That internal drive can sometimes clash with medical caution, and when that happens, the decisions become even more complicated. What makes it even tougher is the unpredictable nature of these injuries. Without symptoms, without clear limitations, it becomes harder to justify a long shutdown from a player's perspective. But from a long-term standpoint, ignoring the warning signs, even silent ones, can lead to outcomes that are far more damaging. So now, everything hangs in the balance. The timing, the management, the patience, every choice matters. Because what happens next doesn't just affect one player, it influences the entire dynamic of a team that has high expectations and very little margin for error. And as the countdown to opening day continues, this situation remains one of the biggest question marks, not just for the Toronto Blue Jays, but for anyone trying to understand how quickly things can change in a season that hasn't even officially begun yet. As this situation continues to unfold, the conversation naturally shifts from what happened to what comes next. And that's where things get even more complicated for Jose Berrios and the Toronto Blue Jays. Because now it's no longer just about identifying the injury. It's about deciding how to handle it in a way that doesn't create a bigger problem down the line. There's a growing sense of frustration when you look at how situations like this tend to be managed across the league. Not necessarily because of one specific decision, but because of a pattern that keeps repeating itself. Players deal with lingering issues. They try to push through. Teams try to balance urgency with caution, and more often than not, it ends up costing more than expected. That's what makes this case feel so delicate, especially considering everything that's already happened with Berrios over the past months. From a purely strategic standpoint, the answer might seem obvious. If you're dealing with a stress-related injury in a pitcher's elbow, giving it time is the safest route. Not a couple of days, not a quick reset, but real recovery time. The kind that allows the body to fully reset instead of just temporarily masking the issue. But baseball isn't played in a vacuum, and decisions like that come with consequences, especially when you're trying to stay competitive from day one. At the same time, there's another layer to this that makes the situation harder to read. This isn't an injury that suddenly appeared out of nowhere. It traces back months, possibly even longer, which raises a difficult question. How much rest is actually enough? If a player has already spent several months away from full intensity and the issue is still present, does more rest solve it? Or does it just delay the inevitable? That uncertainty creates a kind of gray area where there's no perfect answer. Shut him down for too long, and you risk losing a key piece for a significant part of the season. Bring him back too soon, and you risk turning a manageable issue into something far more serious. And in a league where pitching depth can define success or failure, every decision carries weight. Another factor that can't be ignored is the structure of the rotation itself. When everything is aligned, teams can afford to be patient. But when there are already question marks surrounding other arms, the pressure increases. Suddenly, it's not just about one player's health. It's about the stability of the entire pitching staff. And that's where the temptation to accelerate timelines starts to creep in. For Berrios, the situation is even more personal. This is a player who wants to be on the mound, who feels ready, who isn't experiencing pain in a way that would naturally hold him back. That disconnect between how he feels and what the diagnosis says is one of the most challenging aspects of all. Because from his perspective, everything might seem manageable, even normal. But the medical reality tells a different story, one that requires restraint. And restraint is not easy in a competitive environment, especially when expectations are high, when every game early in the season feels important, and when players are constantly trying to prove their value. It's in these moments that decisions can tilt one way or another, sometimes based more on emotion than long-term logic. There's also the risk of compensation, something that often goes unnoticed until it becomes a bigger issue. When a pitcher knows something isn't quite right, even subconsciously, adjustments start to happen. Mechanics change, pressure shifts to other parts of the arm or body, and before you know it, one problem leads to another. That chain reaction is exactly what teams try to avoid, but it's also one of the hardest things to control. Looking at the bigger picture, this situation reflects a broader challenge within the sport. Managing player health in a game that demands repetition at the highest level is never simple. The line between being cautious and being overly conservative is thin, and crossing it in either direction can have consequences. That's why cases like this tend to draw so much attention, because they highlight just how fragile that balance really is. And while there's no indication of immediate panic, there is a growing awareness that this isn't something that can be taken lightly. Even if the initial reports suggest that the injury can be managed, even if there's optimism about a relatively quick return, the underlying risk doesn't just disappear. It stays there, quietly influencing every throw, every outing, every decision moving forward. For the Blue Jays, this means constant monitoring, constant adjustments, and a willingness to adapt as new information comes in. Plans that seem solid today can change quickly, especially when dealing with something as unpredictable as a stress-related elbow injury in a starting pitcher. So as the days go by and the season inches closer, the focus remains locked on how this will be handled. Not just in terms of timelines, but in terms of philosophy. Will patience win out, or will urgency take over? Will this be managed as a long-term investment or as a short-term necessity? Because in the end, the difference between those two approaches could define not just the trajectory of Jose Barrios' season, but the overall stability of the Toronto Blue Jays as they try to navigate the early stages of a campaign filled with expectations and very little room for error. What adds even more tension to this entire scenario is the messaging coming from within the team. When the idea is presented that this could be something manageable, something that a player might even pitch through, it naturally divides opinions. On one side, there's cautious optimism, especially with no ligament damage involved. On the other, there's a growing concern that this might be downplaying a situation that historically tends to escalate if not handled with extreme care. The word fracture alone carries weight, especially in baseball. Even when it's classified as a stress fracture, even when it's described as relatively minor, it still represents a structural issue. And for a pitcher, the elbow isn't just another part of the body, it's the foundation of everything he does on the mound. Every throw, every pitch, every ounce of velocity depends on that joint functioning at full capacity without limitation. There's also the timeline to consider, and that's where things start to feel a bit rushed. Opening day is right around the corner, and even though it's already been confirmed that Jose Barrios won't be ready for that first moment, the idea that he could return shortly after raises eyebrows. Because realistically, how much can truly change in such a short window when dealing with an injury rooted in long-term overuse? At the same time, the team seems to be walking a fine line between caution and urgency. Shutting him down for a few days is a step, but it doesn't necessarily address the bigger picture. Monitoring the situation sounds responsible, but it also leaves room for interpretation. And in cases like this, interpretation can be risky, especially when the player himself feels capable of continuing without major adjustments. Another element that can't be overlooked is how this might impact performance, even if he does return relatively soon. Pitchers rely heavily on rhythm, timing, and confidence. Any interruption, especially one tied to uncertainty about physical condition, can disrupt that balance. Even if Barrios steps back onto the mound, the question becomes whether he can truly perform at the level expected without hesitation or limitation. And as all of this unfolds, there's an underlying sense that this might not be a one-time issue. The combination of past concerns, current diagnosis, and the nature of the injury suggests that this could linger in some capacity throughout the season. Not necessarily as something that sidelines him completely, but as a constant factor that needs to be managed, watched, and carefully navigated every time he takes the ball. But before we move forward, don't forget to join our channel and give this video a like. Your support helps us keep delivering the latest news about the Los Angeles Dodgers. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the news, so drop a comment below. A seismic rumor is rippling through the baseball world, and if it materializes, it could reshape the balance of power across the league. According to growing speculation among insiders, the Los Angeles Dodgers are exploring a blockbuster deal that would send a staggering package of 9 players in exchange for BYRON Buxton. While nothing has been confirmed, the mere possibility of such a move has already ignited debate about risk, ambition, and long-term strategy. Buxton, long regarded as one of the most electrifying talents in the game, represents both elite upside and lingering uncertainty. When healthy, he is a game-changer, a rare blend of speed, defensive brilliance, and explosive power at the plate. For a Dodgers organization that consistently operates in win-now mode, acquiring a player of that caliber could signal an all-in push toward another championship run. But the cost being discussed is what truly turns heads. Parting ways with 9 players, regardless of their individual profiles, suggests a dramatic consolidation of assets. It raises questions about depth, future flexibility, and whether Los Angeles is willing to mortgage a significant portion of its pipeline for immediate impact. Such a move would not only reshape the roster, but also send a clear message to rivals. The Dodgers are not content to wait. From the other side, the potential trade hints at a franchise possibly recalibrating its direction. Moving a player like Buxton could indicate a pivot toward building organizational depth and reducing reliance on a single star whose availability has at times been unpredictable. For now, this remains firmly in the realm of rumor. Yet in a sport where bold moves often define eras, the mere discussion of a 9-for-1 swap is enough to captivate fans and analysts alike. If it happens, it won't just be a trade, it will be a statement. That's all for this update. If you enjoyed the video and want to stay up to date with exclusive news about the Los Angeles Dodgers, be sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that like button. We always appreciate your comments and feedback. See you in the next video.